So we're going to be in Daniel again, and we're going to be talking about the mind tonight. And I am going to, I didn't get all the way through the body stuff, but I will try to cover that and go back to it. I did give you that again on your handout. It's the green handout that's on the tables. Trying to go through those five senses of, what does God expect for us body-wise, in terms of what we see, in terms of what we hear. The example would be kind of faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the Word of God. That's Romans 10:17. So that should tell us that listening to the Word of God in some way, shape, or form, whether it's us reading it or somebody speaking it like this, that it's a way for us to grow in our faith is by doing that. So, I know smell is one that you guys are like, what? What are you talking about, Chris, in terms of smell? But, I gave you a couple of scriptures there that the second one says, but thanks be to God who always leads us as captives in Christ's triumphal procession and uses us to spread the aroma of the knowledge of Him everywhere. For we are to God the pleasing aroma of Christ among those who are being saved and those who are perishing. To the one we're the aroma that brings death, to the other the aroma that brings life. And you can imagine, what we smell like kind of stuff to the world, and just the idea that have you ever been somewhere where you smell a really good perfume or really good cologne? And you kind of stop, you kind of go, oh, that smells really good, you know what I'm saying? And so it makes you stop for a moment. And the same is true when somebody enters the room that is a Christian, somebody that you're excited to see. It's almost like breathing in that perfume, that wonderful smell. Just like when you went to your grandmother's house and she was baking cookies or she's baking biscuits or whatever it might be, that smile that came across your face. And again, I'm revealing my sins to you by saying that the smells of food is what make me happy as a child. But touch, Jesus was very upfront about, the leper that he needed to heal. He didn't have to touch him. He didn't touch everybody he healed. Sometimes he spoke it. Sometimes he rubbed mud on their face. Sometimes whatever it might be. And in the case of the leper, he took him by the hand and touched his arm because that's the one thing the leper never got, was somebody touching him. They always had to yell unclean. So just the idea that, instead of using our fists to hurt each other, He wants us to lift up holy hands with one another. Those are the kinds of things that I'm talking about in terms of, and that again will prove that point of stop. Remember we talked about in the swim lesson, stop doing this, which you were doing over here, which is drowning, right? Stop your flailing around, right? If somebody's drowning out in the ocean, what does a lifeguard have to do? Kind of has to fight them off, get them from behind and hold them underneath their chin, or else they'll drown them both. And so stop doing what you're doing and watch me do it here. Now you try, right? Just the stroke, kicking your feet, doing your hands, right? All right, so that's kind of the body part in a nutshell. So because I am so excited about the mind part tonight, so let's go to that second page. It's actually the white pages in your handout, and it says the mind. And it is trying to figure out what does the Bible say about our minds and how is that important in terms of, because it really is, if you don't believe your body's important in terms of you serving Christ, if you go out every Saturday night and get drunk and come, whether you come to church or not come to church, you're hungover, how effective are you going to be for God? You know what I'm saying? How effective are you on Thanksgiving Day at doing anything?
Eating food.
You know what I mean? Sleeping. Right? We're good. Tryptophan kicks in, right? All those kind of things. But our body can hinder us in terms of serving Christ. And our mind can do the same thing if we're focusing it on the wrong things. So again, we're back to stop doing this, start doing this. And so the question says, are we supposed to control our mind, and how do we do that? And I'm not talking about, Jill sitting across the room going, I'm controlling Chris's mind, right? It's not that. That's not what we're talking about. 2 Corinthians 10:5 says, first, we destroy arguments and every lofty opinion raised against the knowledge of God. And second, we take every thought captive. It's like when you move in a battle, you destroy the fortress and then you take captives. We take every thought captive to obey Christ. All right, so what are your thoughts at different times? So if you're getting if your alarm goes off in the morning and you've worked the same place for 15 years, how do you feel about going to work that morning maybe? Or when that alarm goes off and you look over at the person that you're in the bed with, who you've been married to for 15 years or whatever, and you go, what is the thought that's in your head?
Gotta get up.
When you go out, she's fixing to hit me if I don't shut that away. There are lots of terrible comments going on right now. The idea of us controlling our mind, what do we think is possible? So let's look together in Daniel. Let's look at Daniel 5. And this is a story I have preached on many times, especially in this church. I've preached on it 2 or 3 times. But, there are people who would look me in the face, who sit in churches every week and say, oh, this is just made up fairy tale. What you're reading me, Chris, is something that's an allegory. It's something that's a metaphor. It's something that is not real, not true. And actually, I do believe that there's plenty of supernatural going on in the world, that God is active, that He's intervening, He's doing miracles, signs, and wonders all the time. So if we look at 5:1, Daniel 5:1, it says King Belshazzar, that's Nebuchadnezzar's son, who's now taken over. So Nebuchadnezzar's the crazy one who had the dream and went out and lived among the animals and ate the grass and all that stuff. His son, Belshazzar, gave a great banquet for 1,000 of his nobles and drank wine with them. I just can't imagine having 1,000 people over to the house. It's bad enough if we're going to have a dinner party for 6 people. You know what I mean? My mom used to have like 7 or 8 people over. They'd play bridge or whatever. And she'd have Dad and I cleaning the basement. She'd have us cleaning the garage, the attic, the shed. I'm like, wait, no one's going to the shed, Mom. We're playing bridge, right? She's like, it needs to be cleaned anyway, right? There's 1,000 people that are there. And it says, while Belshazzar was drinking his wine, he gave orders to bring in the gold and silver goblets that Nebuchadnezzar, his father, had taken from the temple in Jerusalem, so that the king and his nobles, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. So they brought in the gold goblets that had been taken from the temple of God in Jerusalem, and the kings and the nobles, his wives and concubines, drank from them. As they drank the wine, they praised the gods of God, gold and silver and bronze and iron, wood and stone. Suddenly, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall near the lampstand in the royal palace. The king watched the hand as it wrote. His face turned pale, and he was so frightened that his legs became weak and his knees were knocking. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around his neck, and he'll be made the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom. Then all of the king's wise men came in, but they could not read the writing or tell the king what it meant. So King Belshazzar became even more terrified, and his face grew more pale. His nobles were baffled. The queen, that's his mother, hearing the voices of the king and his nobles, came into the banquet hall. May the king live forever, she said. Don't be alarmed. Don't look so pale. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. That's next week's lesson, right? In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. You heard that, right? We're talking about the mind, right, tonight? Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belshazzar, was found to have a keen mind, there you go, and knowledge and understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, and solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel, and he will tell you what the writing means. So Daniel was brought before the king, and the king said to him, Are you Daniel, one of the exiles my father, the king, brought from Judah? I have heard that the spirit of the gods is in you, and that you have insight, intelligence, and outstanding wisdom. The wise men and enchanters were brought before me to read this writing and tell me what it means, but they could not explain it. Now I have heard that you are able to give interpretations to solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you'll be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you'll be made the 3rd highest ruler in the kingdom. Then Daniel answered the king, You may keep your gifts for yourself and give your rewards to someone else. Nevertheless, I will read the writing for the king and tell him what it means. Your Majesty, the Most High God gave you, your father, Nebuchadnezzar, sovereignty and greatness and glory and splendor. Because of the high position he gave him, all the nations and peoples of every language dreaded and feared him. Those the king wanted to put to death, he put to death. Those he wanted to spare, he spared. All right, let me skip down because I don't want to bore y'all with all this stuff. If we go down It says this in verse 25. This is the inscription that was written. Mene, mene, tekel, parsin. Here is what these words mean. Mene, God has numbered the days of your reign and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed on the scales and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. Then, at Belshazzar's command, Daniel was clothed in purple. A gold chain was placed around his neck, and he was proclaimed the third highest ruler in the kingdom. That very night, Belshazzar, king of the Babylonians, was slain, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom at the age of 62. All right, so that story is about a lot of supernatural stuff going on, and that Daniel could interpret something that nobody else, all of the learned, all of the higher-ups who had intellect, knowledge, everything they'd studied, knew all the different languages, could not read it. And God gave him the ability to be able to read it, and not only was he able to read it, think about this, that a mysterious hand, I'm going to be honest with you, if I'm sitting in my living room and I've got the remote in my hand and I'm doing this number right here, and a mysterious floating hand is in my living room writing on the wall, number one, I'm going to have to change my pants. Number two, I'm going to run out of that house and we ain't going back in, right? I mean, that's just the nature of it. I'm not being ugly. That's exactly what would happen. And so they're like, gee, that's odd. And it does say he was terrified. The king was terrified. And he wants somebody to interpret what's on the wall, right? And nobody can do it. And that makes him more terrified until Daniel comes in. And because of the gifts that God has given him, because of the intellect and all of those things. Now, let's go back to, in chapter 1, I read to you last week the part where he says, look at verse 17, 117 in Daniel. It says, to these 4 young men, God gave knowledge and understanding of all kinds of literature and learning, and Daniel could understand visions and dreams of all kinds. So God had given them that ability. That doesn't mean that you have to be somebody special for God to give you that ability. You can ask for the ability to do whatever. You can ask, Lord, help me to do this, whatever it might be. If it's installing garage doors or being a teacher or being a farmer or a chemical engineer or whatever it might be, doctors, nurses, lawyers, whatever. You can ask for abilities from God and He will give those things to you. I do believe that. So here we are, and we're looking at this, and we're trying to figure out, okay, so if we're going through the packet, trying to figure out, it says, what do you think is possible in the world? Because that was an impossible story I just read. And in fact, every chapter of Daniel is an impossible story for us sometimes. Daniel in the lion's den, closing the mouths of the lions, right? Interpreting the king's dream and he didn't tell it what the dream was, right? Each of those things that we talk about. So, what do you believe is possible in this world? And that's one of the things that has to change, because Angus Buchan, who is an evangelist from South Africa. Okay, Angus was a farmer. His parents were poor immigrants from, I think, Scotland or Ireland. I can't remember which. His dad was a blacksmith, and they went to move from there to South Africa. And actually, they didn't move to South Africa. They moved to Zambia, if I'm not mistaken, in Africa. And that's where he was born, and Angus was born. And he was a farmer, and tremendous guy, but got saved, came to know the Lord. And just so you can understand with me, how many of y'all have ever heard of Angus Buchan? Anybody? Okay. So Angus Buchan had a men's conference, felt God telling him to have this mighty men's conference. And the first one he had 40 people. So if we had one over in the gym, a mighty men's conference, we'd be excited that we had 40 people, right? So they had it for 7 years. They only had 7. The first year there were 40 people there. The 7th year there were 450,000 people there. Yeah. Okay? He had an event in Africa where he said, we're going to have a prayer meeting for revival in all of Africa, and 1 million people showed up. The name of the town was Bloemfontein. Bloemfontein or something like that. I have no idea. I can't pronounce it, so I apologize to you. Then 1 million people show up for a prayer meeting. Okay? So in terms of our walk, we can cast stones at anybody and say, oh, I'm not too keen on Billy Graham, or I'm not too keen on Oral Roberts, or I'm not too keen on Pat Robertson, or whoever it is that you're not too keen on, right? But when the proof is in the pudding, right? The proof is in the fruit, right? And so if we can look at and we can see that lives are being changed and transformed, the world, is that this was a guy who was just a farmer. I'm saying it that way on purpose because it's not that he was so-and-so with this many degrees. It wasn't that he was king of so-and-so's son. It wasn't that he was, we can trace his line back to King David. It's not any of that. He's just a farmer in South Africa who took hold of God's promises and changed the world. And actually, you might actually get the opportunity to hear him speak sometime because he comes regularly and speaks at World Outreach Church over in Murfreesboro. So he's there from time to time, and he's spoken at he spoke at Bridgestone Arena to a full packed house up there. I know when he was here the last time. I tell you those things because it is about us making some changes in our life, and the first thing that we have to do is figure out our attitude for each day. And sometimes I just gave you three choices there. One is that we kind of float around like seaweed. We don't really have any purpose, right? And some of us would say, that's my children you're speaking of, right? They live in my basement and they float in and out and it's like seaweed. But then some of us just live for me. There's actually places on the planet that you can go to like hedonism. If you're looking for how people live their lives, if you're going regularly to a place called hedonism, then, it's not hard to figure out that your life is about you and about your needs and what you want to do. So some of us are living for just me, and then the others want to change the world with God. I want to change my life. I want my life to be different. So, and I can do all things through Christ who gives me strength, right? Philippians 4:13, that's our attitude. So then we have to change our perspective. Not just our attitude, but our perspective. And our perspective is about counting our blessings. Because so many of us will get up every morning and go, this life that I have, so bad. So, whatever. And when we sit down and count our blessings, then we realize, oh my goodness. And then if you're counting your blessings, there's no way that you can't say, what are your opportunities? What are the possibilities for you? Okay, if you were born in Haiti, what are the possibilities for you? If you're born in India and you're an untouchable in that caste system, do you have any hope of ever being anything other than somebody who takes out people's poop from their house or from businesses? Because that's what an untouchable does. That, and also when somebody dies, they're the only one that can touch them to be able to carry them out. And that's why we call them untouchables. But it's a caste. You can't get out of that caste if you live in India. And how many people live in India? Billions. Okay? So your possibilities when you wake up in the morning, and even right now, what could you do? What could you do? Could you go to college right now? Absolutely. Could you not? Right? Could you be a politician for our country and change the country? Absolutely, you could. I'm being honest with you. The possibility is there. I don't care who you are. We have all kinds of politicians, right? We have literally South Carolina had a guy that was 93, 94 years old, right? You know what I'm saying? So, you can be as old. And then there's guys that, they meet whatever the minimum requirement is. They might be, 25 years old or whatever. And we have those guys as well. We have people who are from all backgrounds, right? We got, you could do that. The possibilities are anything. You understand that? There's a guy I watched on TV, weighed 1,000 pounds, and somebody heard his story. The doctors went in, they tore the wall off the side of his house because there was could not get him out of the house any other way. They had to tear a wall down, got him out, and helped him lose down to 200 and something pounds and get healthy in his life. That's possible. You know what I'm saying? And I'm sure if he was sitting there at 1,000 pounds, he was going, this is some kind of life I've got here, right? I can't even get out of this room or out of this chair. You understand? The possibilities are endless. The opportunities for us here are endless. So at some point, we do take kind of an assessment and we go, okay, I'm not a very good tap dancer. Not a very good tennis player. I'm not a very good cook. I'm not very smart. I'm not very. And when we do that self-evaluation, then what should that lead us to? Whatever our interests are, we should be willing to listen to somebody who is good at that, right? So if I'm going in the military, I should listen to those guys. If I'm going to college, I should listen to those teachers. If I'm going to learn to be a mechanic, hopefully there's a guy standing there like my grandfather who's going, this is how you do this to change the oil. This is how you change a battery. This is how you change your air filter. This is how you change your antifreeze, right? And we're watching and learning and listening to what they have to say because they're the expert. So that's called humility. That if I'm playing whatever sport, that I'm listening to the coach. And I'm going to tell you, I played baseball since I was 4 years old, and the teams that I see today are exactly the same as they were back then. About a third of them, our kids are going, tell me that again. What am I supposed to do? Show me. Okay. How am I supposed to hold that ball? How am I supposed to do? What's my stance? How am I supposed to hold the bat? Those kind of things. And the other 2/3 are going, what are you doing tonight after the game's over? I'm kind of thinking about, and they're not listening at all. And I'm like, why are you out here? Because you're not getting any better. This is not going to help our team at all for you to come stand in a baseball outfit or a football outfit for an hour and not pay attention. It's not going to help you. So we got to get to where we're willing to listen. So that's that humility thing. And I love this story. This is one of my favorite absolute stories. Y'all know who Joe DiMaggio is, right? I know we're all old, young people and all that, and people are like, who's Joe DiMaggio? Well, Joe DiMaggio was married to Marilyn Monroe. Number one, for some people, they'll go, wow. But then he won like 10 championships in baseball. He won all these batting titles. He still owns the longest hit streak, 56 games in a row. So in the 30s, he was a player who was phenomenal, already playing for the Yankees, doing all this stuff. And Ty Cobb comes around, and you have to understand that Joe DiMaggio goes, he's the greatest baseball player. He and Babe Ruth are kind of that guys, Ty Cobb coming into my dugout or whatever. And Ty Cobb walks over to me and he goes, the bat you're using is too heavy. You should shrink down to a smaller size. Use a lighter bat. He's telling Joe DiMaggio this. Joe DiMaggio is what considered to be, him and Ted Williams are kind of the two probably greatest hitters of all time. You know what I'm saying? If we're looking at them back to back. And Ty Cobb said it. You know what Joe DiMaggio did? He got a lighter bat. And you go, wait, this is Joe DiMaggio because Ty Cobb said it. He went, makes sense to me. And some of you all are sitting here going, Ty Cobb that runs the fire department here? No, not Ty Cobb that runs the fire department. It's who he's named for. So here we have him being willing to listen and take that information because it is power, right? It is anytime somebody can give me a tip or something that helps me, information and knowledge are power. And then that last piece of the puzzle for perspective is what I keep telling you week after week. If you're not growing, you're dying. So I'm going to be honest with you, is there are days when I wake up and I go, my brain feels like it's turning to mush, right? And I think we've all experienced that to some extent. And so we've got to keep using our brains. And the older you get, I feel like there's not as much new stuff that we're learning. Think of all the stuff that you have to learn when you're a teenager or a little kid. How many classes you go to or tutoring or sports or whatever it is. You're learning. You go to college, learning. You get into business, you're learning. And then you get good at whatever you're doing. And then it's less learning. Right? I mean, it's just some of that. And so we have to be understanding that. Okay, so let's look at 3 scriptures kind of back to back. All right, so Romans 12:2. Do not conform to the pattern of this world. Remember, don't do this, do this, right? We're talking about the swimming example, right? So do not conform to the pattern of this world, but be, what's that big giant word there? Transform. Transform. Okay, so for me, I am an absolute butterfly nut. My daughter has caught it from me, being a butterfly nut. But for me, and it's not like I'm some goofball out with a net trying to catch butterflies, like SpongeBob skipping through the forest or whatever, right? But I love the idea that there's a worm that's going, and they're everywhere, and that they go into a chrysalis, and you go, what are these things hanging in these trees? What are these things hanging over here? What are these things? And then out of that, after a period of time, comes for me, a monarch butterfly of some beautiful color that just flies, and I'm just dumbfounded when I go to the mountains or wherever when I see that, and I see the transformation from disgusting worm that you want to go, but you wouldn't do that because now we're at an age where we go, that worm is going to go into a chrysalis and then it's going to turn into a monarch butterfly or whatever kind of butterfly, and it's going to be awesome. And so that transformation, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. Then you'll be able to test and approve what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. That means that when we renew our mind, that we know what God wants from us. And that's where we sit right now. We're trying to figure out, okay, is it possible that I can change the world? Is it possible that my life as it currently sits can be different in a better way? And so The second one from 1 Corinthians. Who has known the mind of the Lord so as to instruct him? But we have the mind of Christ. He has filled us. When we became a Christian, when we gave our life to Christ, He's given us the mind of Christ. It's whether we use it or not. And that's that first, the first under A on this first, it's under mine. That will be the second page on your thing. It says, Angus Buchan said, God is as big as you will allow Him to be. Remember I said, what's possible? What do you think is possible? Well, if you think everything's possible with God, then the world can change mightily. Can it not? And Angus Buchan has spoken in front of millions and millions of people, and most of us sitting here don't even know who he is. You know what I mean? He's spoken to stadiums full of people, and we go, who? I don't know that name. I don't even know who you're talking about. And yet he is changing the world. And he said, I don't ever want to leave Africa because there's so many people. They have people pushing to the front of the stage to get a Bible. He said there's just kids and teenagers and college-age people pushing to the front. Like if you wanted Taylor Swift tickets, right? They're pushing to the front. And he said they're taking the Bible out of my hand, and the look on their face is like, yes, I got one. He goes, I go to America and he goes, you want a Bible? And they're like, yeah, I got 6 at home. Right? It's a different world in terms of that. Okay, so Luke 24, 45. Jesus opened their mind so they could understand the Scriptures. It wasn't easy until He opened their mind. And so for me, at times I go, Lord, I'm an idiot. I need you to explain it to me. Please give me somebody that can explain it to me or let me understand. That's what it's talking about. And I put this little next part in there because for us, sometimes we say, I can't understand what it's saying. I've tried to read the Bible. I can't get it. I don't understand what it's talking about. And some of that, if we're honest about it, how many of you all have ever, just due to circumstances, maybe it's an early Easter service followed by a breakfast and all that, and you had like 4 cups of coffee or 2 cups of coffee and a Mountain Dew or whatever it might be, and then you come walking into the sanctuary to have church. What do you like? Hey, what are you doing? I don't know. I'm thinking about going to the, I really get to get the oil change in my car. I was thinking about doing that later. I don't know, but my grass needs mowing, and if I don't, oh no, the tractor needs a new belt on it, right? And you're sitting there and stuff's going on in church, and you're not paying attention to any of it. We've done that in school lots of times, right? Because of whether it's our sleep patterns, caffeine, sugar, all those things that we talked about. So sometimes it is necessary to take medicine, whether it's, my son's best friend takes Adderall, and that has such a bad negative connotation sometimes in the world that we live in. But it turned him from a B student to an A student. And he got to where he could really focus in class, and it really, really helped him a lot. I mean, borderline CB student and then to an A student. And so that's why you have so many people who are abusing it, because they're trying their best to get there. But let's talk about C for just a second there, the focus. Catherine Upshaw and Heidi and Jill and everybody else, Martha Bear and Amber, everybody who's taught, everybody who's a teacher in school, especially those kindergarten classes. When they come into kindergarten, Jill doesn't go, even though they probably do at some point now in kindergarten, I don't know. But the very first thing they do is they go, sit down on the carpet.
They can't.
Amber goes, they can't do that, But the first thing is just getting them to where they'll sit still for a minute or two and obey whatever you're telling them to do, but obey the instructions, right? So I need you to go sit down in your chair. And they'll spend 6 weeks getting kids just to where they can sit down in a chair. Not listen to the instructions and teach them multiplication tables and do a term paper. We're not talking about any of that stuff, right? We're talking about just be able to sit in that chair and listen to me for 10 minutes. We'll go do something else. We'll do a lab after that. We'll go play recess. We'll go whatever it might be. But we got to get them to where they'll sit right there and listen to the instructions, right? We're going to teach them that. And that's training somebody. And so if we missed out on that and we never got that, then it makes the learning part, the renewing of my mind, much more difficult. All right, so the number 3 is at the bottom of the page, says, how do I live for Jesus daily in the world? How do I make a difference? And so, and we turn around to the how-to is on the last page, but I want us to see a couple of things, okay? So, Angus decided that he was going to pray when he became a Christian because he wanted to change the world. He wanted to be able to do something great for God. And so he actually, the very first thing he did was he rented a hall. He thought that's what he needed to do. He was just going to church. He wasn't a preacher. He was just going to church, and he said, God told me to rent a hall. And so it's like us, you sitting here going, Memorial Building, let's see if it's available one day next month, whatever. I want to rent the Memorial Building. That's what he did. He went and rented it. Then he went and he paid for a band to play Christian music before the thing, right? He paid for it out of his pocket. He paid to rent the Memorial Building. Paid for a band to come. He paid for some food, some snacks to put on the table, right? Paid for advertising and everything. And he gets there and he's so excited about going in, and it's a big hall. And he goes up there and it's 5 till 7. It's supposed to start at 7. It's like Clint Eastwoodville. Tumbleweed going by, right? There's nobody there. Nobody. And he said, it felt like I got hit in the head with a hammer. And he said, I walked downstairs into the basement of this hall, and he said it was all cobwebby and all that kind of stuff. And he said, I just sat down there and started crying. And he goes, here I am, a full-grown farm man. My dad was a blacksmith, and I'm sitting down here crying. And I said, Lord, I thought you wanted me to do this. I need you to encourage me. This is the first thing I've tried to do. I've tried to step out. And God said, did you really believe people were going to show up? And he said, no. I didn't really think there would be a whole lot of people show up. And God said, well, part of what this is, and this walk with me, is believing that I'm going to do what I say. And so if I tell you that I'm going to do it, then you got to believe that I'm going to do it. And he goes, okay, next time that'll be fine, Lord. Thank you so much. He goes upstairs, and now it's half full. There's half the people are there. He said, I couldn't hear any footsteps, so I just assumed that God filled half of it with angels. That's who was sitting there. And but he said, when he was sitting in the basement, God said, would you go upstairs and preach if there was nobody sitting there? And he goes, yeah, if you want me to, I will. I'll go up there and just stand on the podium, and I'll preach to the empty seats. And so God said, okay, we'll go up there and do that. And then that's when he goes up, and half the room is full. So the first night he preaches and everything, 6 people came to know the Lord. First night. This first time he's ever spoken out in public. And, 6 people came to know the Lord. So that was a Tuesday night, and they did services at that place every night of that week. And on the final night, they preached it, and there were 1,200 military guys there, and 1,000 of them came to know the Lord. This is 6 days into him doing what? I just asked you, turn back to that page, what did that bottom line say? How do I live for Jesus daily in the world, and how do I make a difference? So in his town, 1,006 people. I don't even know what happened Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. I just know that the first night and the last night is that the 1,006 people came to know the Lord. So that's pretty incredible, right? And so he actually went from there, and he started ministering, and he was asked to speak at this one town, and he's got a yellow converted fire truck that he had converted into what they travel in, and it's they just open it up, and it carries all their sound equipment, it carries the people, everything like that. And it's bright yellow, and it says Jesus on both sides of it, right? And he drives through Africa, and he would just stop in a town and preach, and whatever, have a meeting kind of thing. But he gets asked in this one area to come and speak at a stadium. It was like a soccer stadium, and it held 5,000 people. And so there's 5,000 people sitting there, and he said, I got up, and I'm like, yes, I'm getting ready, Lord. Here we go. Let's go do this. And so he said, I'm preaching. And he goes, I'm just letting them have it. And people are going. And the guy, he kind of stops and walks over for a second to talk to the guy on the side of the stage. And the guy goes, like 90% of the people sitting here are Muslim. 80%. 80% are Muslim. They don't want to know about Jesus. They just came because it's a social event and it's kind of whatever. And he goes, so he goes back over and he goes, Lord, let's really give it to him. Come on, what are we going to do? And God said, don't preach anymore. They're not listening. And he's like, I know that, Lord, I know that. And he looks down, and there's a guy leaning on 2 crutches, and he's down at the very front. And God said, go down and pray for that guy. And he's like, okay, this is different than any other ministry that I've had up to this point, right? I thought there was going to be thousands of people getting saved like the last time I did it. And he goes, I stopped. He goes, 5,000 people are just kind of, looking for the concession stand, go to the bathroom, whatever. And he said, I walked right down there, and I start talking to this guy, and then everybody kind of goes, he just kind of stopped and walked down there. What's he doing down there? And so they're watching, and he's talking to this guy, and he said, what's wrong? And he goes, oh, I have a bummed leg. He goes, I was a woodcutter, and there was a tree that fell, and it landed on me, and it damaged this leg, and I've got screws in it and all this kind of stuff, and I just can't hardly even walk on it. It doesn't bend at all. And he said, do you mind if I pray for you? And he goes, absolutely. He goes, do you want to get well? And he goes, oh, yeah, absolutely. And this is a farmer, right? He's going, I'm not a faith healer. I'm just a farmer. I'm just going to pray for you or whatever. And God said, put your hands on his leg. He's like, well, I'm all in here, Lord, right? I'm going to touch a man's leg during the middle of a revival or whatever. And so he's there, and he puts his hands on the guy's knee, right? The guy's still on the crutches or whatever. And he said, so I'm praying for him, and he said, I went, oh, now it ought to bend. And I went, and it didn't bend. And I'm like, I'm sorry, did that hurt? He goes, no, it didn't hurt or whatever. God said, keep praying or whatever. So he said, I continued to pray, and God said, bend his leg. And he goes, and it bent, and the guy goes like this, and then the guy starts like this and throws the crutches down and starts dancing and running around and all this kind of stuff. And we're so jaded about stuff like that we go, this is somebody who was planted there to, just a bit, make people think the lies of superstition. What is possible, right? Well, it had the reverse effect on the crowd. The crowd goes, that's Johnny. I saw the tree fall on him. And, the doctor's over there going, I put the screws in that man's leg. There's no way that he could be doing that kind of stuff. And then everybody goes down to the front. All 5,000 people are all down in the front on their knees, and not to Angus. They're just praying, Lord, you're the God. We just watched you do this mighty miracle. And everybody at the soccer stadium comes to know the Lord. Everybody. And we go, that doesn't happen. That kind of stuff doesn't happen. That's just, and the words that certain people would use in certain denominations is stuff like enthusiasm. That's just enthusiasm. That's like when the Shakers used to work themselves into a fit and then they fall down, passed out on the floor, right? No. This is the moving of God, and are we ready for those kind of things? Are we willing to pray for those kind of things to happen? And I will tell you, Jill and I went on vacation, and I'm usually really, really good about if we're on vacation and we miss a Sunday of church, we go to church wherever we are. We go have church. And so we went to this big, beautiful church when we were on vacation in Florida one time. And we had our kids and everything with us. And so Sela, they said, we're going to have children's church if you want to go. And my boys were a little bit older, and they're like, nah. And Sela goes, yes, I want to go to children's church. It'd be awesome. And so she goes, and there's probably 2,000 people sitting there, I'm going to guess, something like that. It's a great, big, giant church. And it was a good service. I had a good time and all. It felt like it was a good message. And so after it was over, we went to go to children's church to get Sela, and she comes out, and her face is like, this is the greatest church ever. And I'm like, wow, that's a pretty good response. If we're looking for a response, I know Jenny and Heidi would be like, yes, if a kid came out like that at a children's church, that'd be awesome. Right? And so we go to the car, we're going to go get some lunch, and I said, so Sela, tell me about this awesome children's church. She goes, no. She goes, they had a moonwalk in there, Dad. It was like a trampoline that you jump on, and you get in there, and you just bounce. It's a big bounce house. It was huge, massive, and all the kids were in there, and we were jumping around. And then they had video game chairs, and you sat in them, and big screen TVs, and you played video games. And there was like 5 of them, and they all had different games and all that. And we played games and had these wonderful snacks, and they were just so good. And I said, what'd you learn about Jesus today? And she goes, what did I learn about Jesus today? He's good. It was that kind of thing. I was like, did they talk about Jesus? Did they open a Bible? Did they teach you anything about that? No. But they had the coolest stuff in there. It was unbelievable. And we tend to think that's the way to do church, right? That's an effective church, that we're making a difference. And that's not the kind of church we're looking for, right? I'm not looking for that kind of church, and so I hope you're not. But Angus goes back home to his house, and he's got people working on his farm, and he has like 3,000 acres. And he is using it to do all of this growing food to employ the people in the area who are in poverty, but also to feed the people in the area from that stuff. And so he's there, and a fire starts on his property. His property on this side of it, the fence is here, and the property on this side is all a pine forest that they're raising them like a nursery, and they're going to sell it off for the lumber, right? Big giant forest over here. This is in South Africa. On this side of his property, big massive pine forest of everything that's there. And this fire is getting out of hand, and his people can't put it out. And so all of the people that are working on his farm, they're all like, we need to flee. It's going to burn everything down. Everything. The houses. We're not only going to burn the forests down on each side, it's going to burn our houses and take our lives and families. We need to go now. And he said, no. Did you hear what I just said? He said, no. God called us. He told me for us to be here, that we were going to do ministry here, and that and we've been doing what he asked us to do in this place. He said, stop, we're going to pray. And they're like, okay, what are we praying for? He goes, rain. And they're like, the sun is out and beaming. There's not a cloud in the sky. There's no forecast for rain today. We need to go now. It's a huge fire. There's smoke. You can feel the heat, right? We can't fight it. He's like, let's get on our knees and pray in the midst of a fire. I'm not saying do this. I'm just saying this is what they did in terms of what do we believe is possible. They prayed, and there's a story in the Bible that's very similar to this. You should look it up and find it. But they pray, and then one of the guys goes, I see a cloud on the horizon. And he goes, well, how big is it? He goes, it's about the size of my fist. And he goes, okay, maybe we should keep praying. And they're praying, and then lightning strikes right on his property. And then you hear the thunder, and then it's drip, 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 drip. Psh, and here comes the rain, and it puts the fire out. Now, we tend to, because of who we are with our hearts and our minds, we go, God's not a genie in a bottle that I rub the lamp and say, hey, put my fire out for me, right? But God tells us to pray and believe, right? He tells us that he will meet our needs, that he's working for our good. And he said, God called us right here to do this ministry. And so, I love this part. This is the last one, and I'll stop here and we'll read these last few scriptures, but this is the last story. Is that he is asleep at night. This is several years later. And women, Zulu women, come and they're banging on his windows of his bedroom. Like 6 or 7 women. Banging on the like this. Wakes you up. You can imagine what he was feeling. He was like, what is going on here? Whatever. Banging on the windows. So he opens the window and they said, lightning struck our hut and it killed so-and-so, and we were knocked out for a while, but you know what I'm saying? Not knocked out, he didn't use that word. He just said, we were stunned, and as soon as we came and got you or whatever, and we've covered her with a blanket, we need some help. He's like, okay, it's a storm, it's raining, lightning, thunder, and he goes, and this goes to the hut, which is in shambles, and he goes inside, and the lady's laying there on the ground. No pulse, dead as a doornail kind of thing. And so he's like, so what we're going to do is, he's trying to be nice, but he said, I'll go get my truck and we'll take her to the hospital, to the morgue. And they're like, this is what the lady said. There's like 8 ladies surrounding him who all live in this hut with that lady. They go, you've been telling us about this Jesus for a long time. Prove that he's real. You told us that he can do anything, that he's the God of the impossible. Do something about this. And he's like, right? He's literally at that point going, I have been telling her that. I have. This is one of those moments, right? What's your mind saying at that point? That's not possible. This woman's dead. She was struck by lightning, right? She has no pulse. This is not possible. And yet, they all crowded around the door, and he went inside, and he laid hands on her again, much like the man who had the bum leg, and he prays for her, sits up. I'm not going to say to his surprise, but he was like, God, thank you for doing this, because it is this. And then, of course, the message spread throughout the village, right? You know what I'm saying in terms of people coming to know the Lord. And I tell you that because it's important for us to be able to believe God and take him at his word, at what he says. And so these last few scriptures that are there, look at Mark 8, 34 through 38. This is on the very last page. And it says, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. That's not a fun scripture for us to read because we tend to think of that we're supposed to give away all of our possessions, be poor, and walk the streets telling people about Jesus, going door to door, handing out tracts. That's what we imagine when we see that. All it's talking about is the focus of our life. Remember I said some of us float around like seaweed. Some of us live just for us. And then some of us want to change the world through the power of God, right? So all it's saying is shift it off yourself and onto God. That's all it's saying, is that deny yourself. Now we talked about last week about what our body wants to do a lot of times, right? And that we have to deny ourselves if we're going to get into shape, if we're going to be able to, throughout our lifetime, to be able to feel good and to be able to do things with our grandkids, and to be able to do whatever. We have to deny ourselves that extra piece of cake or that extra piece of, that we have to deny ourselves when we want to watch TV and we need to be exercising, walking, or whatever. It's not a hard thing for us to look at the life of Martha and Jack Barron, and we'll do his service on Saturday, is that every single day they were active people out in their neighborhood, in the park that's behind their house, exercising in some way, shape, or form, walking, talking with friends and family, all of that kind of stuff. So it says deny ourselves, take up our cross, follow him. So take up our cross doesn't have to be something negative. It can just be that we carry Jesus into the world wherever we go. That's all it is. And it doesn't mean you have to have a t-shirt on, doesn't have to have a WWJD bracelet on. You're just God's representative wherever you go. It's just natural. It's just who you are. So the next one is Mark 11:22, and it says, have faith in God. Okay, straightforward, and it's kind of like I said something to Ashlyn, about saying this hurts or whatever, and I said, don't do me like the other doctors who say, well then don't do that, right? That's how you fix that. It won't hurt if you don't do that, so don't do it, right? She's like laughing. She goes, no, I'm not going to do that. Right? So the next one says, for with God nothing shall be impossible. That's what the angel told Mary when the angel told her she was going to have a kid. She goes, how's that possible? I've never slept with a man. And he goes, this is the words, this is his response, for with God nothing shall be impossible. I want you to take that as a promise. If you need a tattoo, put that on there, right? If you need a t-shirt with something on it, put that. If you need a bumper sticker, put that. For with God nothing is impossible. And then lastly is the lead into next week's, which is not by might, nor by power, but by my spirit, says the Lord Almighty. Okay, so when Jesus met the disciples, who were they? First day he met them. What kind of people were they? Fishermen, tax collectors, goats, right? I mean, they were kind of like, they were like young men who didn't really understand a whole lot, and And then when Jesus was crucified, and who were they? And even when he was resurrected, who were they? They went and hid, right? You know what I mean? I mean, they were in hiding. But it was the women who were at the cross, right? It was the women that went to the tomb initially. It's the women who were there, and all of his guys had already scattered out of fear. Okay? So we're sitting there where he says, not by might, not by power, but by my spirit. When did they get the spirit? Acts 2. Yeah. Pentecost Sunday. It was 50 days later. That it says they were all together in one place praying together, and the Spirit was given. So that's the transition into that, is that it's God living in us that transforms the world. And it's us getting in line with that. All right, so the last line is, and this is, man, if we could just tell every CP church, every Presbyterian, Methodist, Baptist, Pentecostal, all of those churches, this is a quote from Angus that says, we're not doing things and asking God to bless it. We're asking God what we should do, and He provides. Because that's traditionally what we do, is that we go and run 500 miles that way because that's where we want to go and that's what we want to do. And then we go, God, where are you? Come on, I'm right here. Come on, do this, fix this. I need help here. And God goes, I'm way over there, because that's where the direction I was wanting us to go, and you drag us way over here. And I'm not saying He's not, bears with us, that He does great patience and loves us and compassion and all that. But I do want us to understand that all of this is predicated on us. If you want to hear the best part, and this is the last thing, this is it. You're amazed at the stories that I shared with you about his life. But at the same time, for years, he would get up at 4 in the morning and spend at least 2 to 3 hours praying and reading his Bible in his little farm barn area. 2 to 3 hours every day for decades. And there was a period of time of 6 months where he did it from 4 in the morning until noon every day. 8 hours of praying and reading his Bible. Well, I mean, you can see the results. You can see his growth in Christ. And so it does start with us being dedicated to every single day, taking time. It doesn't have to be 2 hours. It can be that 10 minutes before you leave to go out the door to go to work or whatever it might be. Or it can be a good quiet time during the day sometime. Starting off the day praying and ending the day praying by thanking God for all the ways you saw Him move. God bless you all. Thanks for joining us tonight.